Now, let's welcome Dr. Guy Leitch, who's an aviation expert who joins us now to weigh in on the impact of the current SAA pilot strike. Doctor, great having you with us on the show this afternoon. Welcome. So, most South Africans are new to the reality that pilots could actually go on such a strike action, just like all workers. They do have this right. But with this sudden realization, I suppose, Doctor, comes a lot of uncertainty, in particular how these flight cancellations as well as the overall disruption to operations will actually impact on SAA's recovery plans and the overall country's economy.
Yeah, well, okay, let's divide your comment into two parts then. Let's divide it into the actual immediate human impact, and that really can't be underestimated. It's all very well talking about strikes and flight cancellations, but when you're flying somewhere because you've really got to get there, and now all of a sudden you just got no flights to go on, it really is a huge trauma for many people. And I understand there are people threatening to sue SAA all over the place. Yes, SAA has obligations to provide alternative accommodation and other flights. And in fact, while I'm on the subject, let me just point out that the total extent of the cancellations is about, in my view, about 2/3 of the total flights are being cancelled. Why only 2/3, if you like? Because last week, SAA received those 4 Boeing 737s from Turkish Airlines, Sun Express, and those are flown by Turkish pilots. And then there's also the management pilots who are not allowed to go on strike at this stage. And then also SAA can put its passengers on codeshare airlines, in other words, on another airline to get them there. So it's about 66% of the flights, and therefore the people that have been struggled. The other issue is, well, what is the actual impact from a pure financial point of view? Can SAA afford this? Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer because we haven't seen any audited financial results from SAA since about 2018. A lot of people are saying, yeah, well, SAA declared a profit of 256 million a few weeks ago, but that was based on the 2023 financials, which haven't been audited. However, I'm also inclined to believe Prof. Lamola when he assures us that the airline is continuing to operate profitably and sustainably. And my view then is that the airline, in fact, can afford this disruption. I try to do some little thumbsuck calculations as to what the actual impact might be. And assuming a total revenue of around about 700 million for the December period, well, I conclude that the strike is probably costing the airline in the vicinity of about 17 million rand a day in lost revenue. So actually, the airline needs to be able to afford the increases soon.
Absolutely, Guy. I mean, certainly one has to take into account the timing also, as you've just alluded, of the strike action as well. This being a peak season, a festive season, and we're just on the wave of celebrating the national carrier's positive turnarounds.
Yeah, but bear in mind, it's been a slow turnaround. Most of the other airlines around the world are back to well over 100% of their former let's call it 2019 turnover. SAA is obviously lagging enormously far behind. It's still around about a third of its, or even less, 25% of its previous size. And that is because it doesn't have the capital to acquire new aircraft and to grow rapidly. And indeed, full marks to the SAA management team for not succumbing to the temptation to jump back into routes that might not have been profitable anymore.
And Doctor, I mean, pilots are demanding an additional benefits as well as that 15.7% wage increment. But can SAA afford it, particularly at this stage? And I also have to point out, Doctor, that the pilots had initially taken a 50% pay cut when the airline actually resumed its operations. So this is actually not an unfair ask on the part of the pilots.
That's the commonly held view that SAA knocked the pilots right back. They lost a lot of pilots, those who are still with you. And the numbers are broadly speaking. There were about 750 pilots in the airline in 2018. There are now 148. So they've enormously culled back the population. And the reality, too, is that they can continue to get new pilots because people still want to come in and work for SAA, largely for the experience of being able to qualify on wide-body aircraft. And then they'll leave the airline to much greener, richer pastures. And then we also point out the other airlines are offering much better terms of employment, conditions of employment, in terms of flight and duty times, in terms of time off, and so on. So it's going to be very difficult for SAA to retain these people, these pilots, these skills, if they don't come to the party and provide at least, I would say, the 15% increase, which, to answer your first question, yes, therefore, they can afford because they can't afford not to. And I'd just like to make a small point here, and that is that they are paying over the top for these so-called wet leased aircraft from Turkey, the Sun Express aircraft. Those pilots will be getting full international pilot pay. So if they can afford those pilots, surely they can afford to pay the SAA pilots that as well.
Absolutely, and I suppose that's the argument there, Dr. Guy. But what do you think then will serve to break the current impasse? Do you think government can intervene as we've seen with public entities, and how at this stage?
No, I think it's a complete mistake to think that government should intervene. This is an absolute test of government's commitment to SAA, because government has agreed that there will be no more bailouts, there will be no more guarantees for bank loans, no more easy money. And hand in hand with that should be that there will be no more government interference. And it would be a straight interference if government were to somehow come to the party and provide additional funds for the for pilot retention or anything like that. The airline must be allowed to stand alone and get on with itself. Otherwise, should be reported to the Competition Commission. And otherwise, government has failed in all its previous promises to make the airline commercially viable, even if it's not hugely profitable, at least sustainable.
Very compelling arguments this afternoon. Dr. Guy Leitch, an aviation expert on the SAA strike by pilots. Thank you so much for your input.